Now, leadership should understand the 20%, 80% rule. And the 20%, 80% rule, I don't know exactly where it came from, but if you're going to be involved with people any amount of time or any number of people from whatever walks of life, you've got to understand what we call the 20%, 80% rule. And if you haven't heard it before, let me give it to you. The 20%, 80% rule says, it seems like, and that's a lot of things, right? It seems like 20% of the people do 80% of the business, and 80% of the people do 20%. It's just one of those strange things about life. And we can ask whys all day long. A lot of things you don't ask why. Let the obvious be your best teacher. Almost any enterprise, right? Whether it's a business or a club or whatever. Sure enough, 20% of the people do 80%, 80% do 20%. Ask the minister of the church, right? Who picks up the tab here? I'll bet you he will say, well, let's see, about 20% of the people pick up 80% of the tab. And 80% pick up 20%. It's just one of those interesting statistics about life, okay? Now, once you understand the 20%, 80% rule, here's what you must learn to do as a leader. Don't try to change it. This is not something you change. This is something you work with. See, there's a lot of things in life you don't change. You don't say, I think I'll take fall and put it after winter. Say, no, no, no. See, that's too difficult. You don't change fall around and put it after winter. You leave it where it is. But you learn to work with it like it is. Okay? The best beginning for any successful venture is reality. Let's figure out how it really is. And not kid ourselves. And not wish it was different. Okay? So we take the 20%, 80% rule like it is, and we learn to work with it. Now, here are some of the key points in understanding the 20%, 80% rule. If you wish to affect your business 80%, you must work with the 20%. It's just one of those things you just learn to work with. To affect your business 80%, you work with the 20% that are creating 80% of the business. Now, let me give you a neat part of life. The pull is in the opposite direction. And it always is. Here's what success is. Success is learning to move in the opposite direction of the normal negative pull. Success is just overcoming the normal negative downward trend. Because I guess that's what life was meant to be. Overcoming the normal negative downward pull. Success is moving in the opposite direction. Life that springs from the seed really is moving in the opposite direction. Gravity wants to pull the seed down, but sure enough, the seed being pulled down by the soil takes root, comes to life, right? Comes to life, takes root, starts to grow, and which way does it grow? Up, right? It gets the roots and the nourishment, but it grows up. It pushes its way against gravity, right? It moves up, and that's what success is, that's what life is, of movement in the opposite direction. So, guess who wants 80% of your attention? The wrong percentage. The 80% of whatever enterprise you're working with, if you got a group of people going, 80% of them want 80% of your time. They say, well, we're the 80%. But see, you've got to learn to resist that. Now, you do it diplomatically. You do it with intelligence. But if you want to be successful, you got to do it. Okay? You've got to give 80% of your time to the 20% and 20% of your time to the 80%. Somebody says, well, now how do you do that? Well, now here's where you got to get smart. Here's what I learned to do with the 20%, 80% rule. I learned to give the 20% individual time and the 80% group time. I just figured that out. Right? Say, well, these 80% are only producing 20% of the business. So I've got to figure out a way to talk to them by groups. Now I can talk to an individual that's doing the high production, but I can only talk to the groups in these collection of people that are doing the small production. Okay? Now guess who wants your individual time? The wrong percentage. What you got to do is just diplomatically move in the opposite direction. You just diplomatically learn how to just give the group time to the 80%, individual time to the 20%. Now this is not something you fight, it's something you work with. Guy says, oh, I got it made, here's what I will do. I'll just eliminate the 80%. Right? They're only getting 20% of the business anyway. I'll just get rid of them. And I'll just keep the 20%. Well, you can do that, but here's what will happen pretty soon. The people that you've got left after you have fired the 80%, sure enough, 20% of them will be doing 80% of the business. And 80% will be doing 20%. This is like the seasons. This is not something you try to rearrange. This is something you get smart enough to work with. Now, every leader must have some listening time to what's going on in the field, what's happening with the people. Here's what you must do with your listening time. You must give 80% of your listening time to the 20%, and 20% of your listening time to the 80%. Now, guess who wants 80% of your listening time? The wrong percentage. So you just have to learn to be diplomatic. Okay? It's incredible. This is something you learn to work with and not against. Now, what you do is just learn to capitalize on the way things are. To create the market, most people buy when it's high and sell when it's low. Right? That's normal. That's the normal scare. That's the normal being uneasy. Buy when it's high, sell when it's low. Guess who becomes wealthy? The people who move in the opposite direction. Now that takes tremendous strength of will and capacity and knowledge. And it doesn't mean you hit it every time, but it does mean your chances are much better to buy when it's low and sell when it's high. Right? That's what success is. Success is moving in the opposite of the normal negative downward pull. But what's unique about human enterprise is unique things can be accomplished by understanding the world setup, understanding how people are, and learning how to work with it and not against it.